I'm not proud of how I walked in the door. I used my middle name, cut my resume in half, and let them believe I was just a 30-something product guy who'd bounced around too long to be dangerous. I parked 2 blocks away for the first month, so nobody would see the plates on my truck and Google me. I said we when they said we, took notes like a junior, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, and kept my real last name off the Slack directory. If you think that sounds paranoid, fine. Where I'm from, you learn that people treat you differently when they know what you own, and I owned more of that company than half the board put together. The first morning, the lobby smelled like burnt coffee and carpet cleaner. The receptionist handed me a badge with a misprinted photo that made me look harmless. That helped. Harmless men are allowed in rooms where the real conversations happen. They're asked to set up the projector and stay late. I wanted that. Not the projector, the rooms. I wanted to see who was actually steering the ship that carried the technology I'd spent 5 years of my life building, the one they'd acquired, rebranded, and then somehow starved. I didn't join to play gotcha. I joined because I couldn't stand reading another press release that sounded like a eulogy. The acquisition had looked good on paper. Cash, stock, promises about strategic alignment. But inside 6 months, the monthly active users on my old product cratered, the lead engineer left, and the roadmap turned into a word cloud. From the outside, you can bang on the glass and write angry emails. From the inside, you can pull a wire and watch which lights go out. They hired me as a PM into the new initiatives group, which is where ideas go to be complemented to death. My manager, let's call him Ethan, met me with a smile that didn't involve his eyes and a stack of Confluence links. "We move fast here," he said, which usually means we forget slowly. He talked in slogans and delivered in bullets. He also had a habit of introducing other people's work as something I've been thinking about, which told me the real org chart wasn't on paper. On day 3, I found the first hairline crack, a dashboard everyone lived and died by, trial to paid conversion, showed a steady climb. Only the query behind it was filtering out any trial that hadn't touched feature X, which meant all the broken funnels were invisible. I asked a junior analyst about it. He looked around as if opinions were contraband and whispered, "It's how they've always pulled it." Always is a useful word. It's where numbers learn to lie. So I started a notebook, not a manifesto, just dates, decisions, artifacts. Who moved what column, who changed a KPI definition 3 days before the exec review. I attached screenshots. I kept my tone flat, like a lab report. When people feel you're writing a story, they perform. When they feel you're writing a log, they forget you're there. The culture was loud and tired at the same time. Stand-ups were theater, people reporting velocity like pennants, smiling hard enough to crack. The CEO liked to walk the floor once a week and ask spontaneous questions that weren't questions. He had that talent for remembering just enough about you to make you feel seen, and just little enough to keep you grateful. The CFO never left finance. He ruled from spreadsheets and sent emails with subject lines like "friendly reminder" that felt like threats in casual clothes. Ethan figured me out the way people figure out a tool in a drawer, useful if left open. He'd drop by at 6:40 p.m., lean on the cubicle wall and say, "You got a good read on users. Could you polish the narrative for tomorrow's deck?" I'd already written the narrative for tomorrow's deck. He meant, make it sound like his. I said sure and learned his commas so well I could ghost him through a fire drill. If you're wondering why I didn't just blow my cover, it's because secrets are lighter than expectations. The day I walk in as the guy whose software we bought, every conversation becomes performance art. People pitch at you. They confess too much or nothing at all. They want tells. Also, the ownership wasn't exactly on my chest. I held it through. A trust my sister managed, paperwork with enough legal cloth over it that, unless you knew where to look, it just read like any other line on a cap table. I hadn't set it up to play games with anybody. I'd set it up because when my father died, I needed a way to keep the house and keep the lights on while lawyers told me who I was. 2 months in, I started pushing small things. Not institution burning, not martyrdom. Switchbacks. Kill a vanity feature quietly by showing how much it costs to keep it alive. Slip an interview clip from a churned customer into a deck, so the silence in the room did the talking for me. In product meetings, I'd ask the question nobody wanted to put on a slide. If this were your own money, would you build this next? Some people started staying behind after meetings. A designer with the posture of someone who'd apologized for a year. An engineer who carried a pager like a grudge. They spoke in the way people do when hope sounds like a rumor. I listened. Then came the first escalation. I flagged the conversion query to Ethan and asked if we should update the board packet with the fixed numbers. He stared at me like I'd suggested arson. No. We'll address methodology next quarter. Don't get academic. Academic is another useful word. It means a correct but inconvenient. That afternoon, I watched my fix get merged into a separate branch nobody would ever run, and the old dashboard ship out to the executive summary, like a fresh coat of paint over a soft spot in the wall. I kept my badge face down and my head level. I picked up lunches, sent thank you notes, made other people look good in rooms where I didn't speak. When I did speak, I used verbs: ship, remove, measure, decide. Nouns get you compliments. Verbs get you accountability. The next crack wasn't cosmetic. A sales deck promised a capability that didn't exist outside a demo environment with hard-coded data. I found the repo. I found the branch. I found the to-do left by a contractor 6 months ago that read, "If this ships, call me." I printed the slide and taped it inside my notebook. I wasn't building a case. I was building a mirror. I wanted to be sure that when I finally stood in front of it, I didn't see my own excuses. You can work like that for a long time. Quiet, useful, invisible enough to be everywhere. You can wear the middle name like a uniform and it'll start to feel like skin. Then someone will use your first name in a meeting and the room will go still. That's when you realize how thin the uniform really is. It happened on a Tuesday. Ops war room, 12 people, pizza boxes, and the sound of laptops breathing. We were triaging a nasty drop in engagement. Someone said we should bump the experiment thresholds because the current numbers were too noisy to be actionable. I said no, the noise was the signal. Ethan laughed into his can of seltzer and said, "Okay, John, let's not turn this into a stats class." He said John, not the name on my badge. He said it like he'd always known it, and like he wanted everyone else to, too. I didn't correct him. I closed my notebook, took a breath that tasted like cardboard, and decided it was time to stop writing down other people's lines. He didn't say how he knew. He didn't have to. A name like mine lives in board minutes and legal filings. All it takes is one board HR analyst cross-referencing payroll with old acquisition paperwork, and the thread starts to unravel. But that Tuesday, the look Ethan gave me wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. The kind of look people give a safe they suddenly realize has been unlocked the whole time. The rest of the meeting went on as if nothing had happened. Metrics, next steps, owners. But every time I spoke, I could feel eyes shifting toward Ethan for cues. He nodded at my points, but with that faint smirk of someone mentally placing a bet. Afterward, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Let's grab 5 minutes tomorrow, just to sync." His tone was polite the way a notice of termination is polite. The next morning, the 5 minutes turned into an hour in a small conference room with no windows. HR sat in. A woman named Carly, always chirpy, held a folder with my onboarding documents like they were evidence bags. Ethan started, soft. "Look, John, what is your legal name?" I answered at once. He nodded, eyes shining like he'd found a bug in production. So help me understand why that wasn't disclosed during hiring. I disclosed what was asked, I said. My qualifications, my references, my right to work. "Sure, but," he continued, "you understand how this looks, right? You, someone with ownership, working under a different name on internal projects? It's a conflict of interest." There it was. The phrase people use when they've run out of moral language but still want to sound righteous. Carly chimed in, voice rehearsed. We're not saying you've done anything wrong, but from a governance standpoint, this creates exposure. Exposure. I almost laughed, like I was radioactive and they'd only just noticed the glow. I asked one question. Did you run this by legal? They hadn't. Of course they hadn't. They were hoping I'd panic, apologize, and offer to resign quietly. That's the trick. Act like they're catching you, even when you're standing in the open. I thanked them for their time and said I'd prefer all further discussion about ownership to go through council. That froze the room faster than air conditioning. I spent the rest of the day working like nothing had happened. Emails, JIRA tickets, feature specs. I smiled when spoken to, but inside the air had changed. Colleagues who used to nod in the hall now looked through me. A rumor travels faster than code deploys. By lunch, I was that guy. The plant, the mole, the air in disguise. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so efficient. At 5:45, an engineer I trusted, Maya, stopped by my desk. She hesitated, then whispered, They're pulling access logs. I think they're trying to build a case that you've been looking at files above your clearance. I hadn't, but I knew what that meant. HR and finance had moved from gossip to paperwork. Once a company opens that folder, they're not looking for truth. They're looking for a signature that'll hold up in arbitration. I went home, poured a glass of water, and stared at my reflection in the kitchen window until it blurred. I'd wanted to help, not expose anyone. I'd wanted to see what had gone wrong, fix it quietly, and maybe, just maybe, feel like I hadn't wasted years building something for people who didn't understand it. Instead, I'd become a liability in their PowerPoint. But that was just the beginning. 2 days later, I got the calendar invite. Meeting with CFO, urgent. The subject line every employee secretly dreads. I walked in to find Ethan already seated beside him. On the big screen was a slide with a company logo and one word, governance. The CFO, a man who looked like he'd been born with a calculator instead of a conscience, leaned back and steepled his fingers. We've reviewed your situation. It's complex. I nodded. It's not, actually. I'm an employee and a minority shareholder. That's legal. Disclosed through a trust. Everything filed with the SEC. He didn't blink. Be that as it may, perception matters. The board needs to ensure transparency. Translation. We need to decide whether to make you the problem or the warning. Ethan jumped in, too eager. To be clear, Jonathan, we appreciate your contributions. But maybe it's best you take some time off while we sort this out. I smiled. You want me out of the building before Friday's board review? Silence. Then the CFO exhaled through his nose. That might be prudent. I left without arguing. You don't argue with people who've already decided what story they're telling about you. You just start writing your own. That night, I opened the folder I'd been keeping. Dates, screenshots, internal reports, expense lines that didn't add up. I wasn't building revenge. I was building clarity. I called my sister, who managed the trust, and told her to expect inquiries. She laughed once. You finally poked the bear, huh? The bear poked itself, I said. The next morning, I received an email marked confidential. It was accidentally CC'd to me by someone in finance who clearly hadn't checked the recipients twice. It was a draft memo to the board outlining potential compliance breaches related to an employee with undisclosed ownership ties. My name wasn't in it. My initials were. The memo concluded with a recommendation: suspend access pending full investigation. I forwarded it to legal, not company legal, my legal. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I stopped hiding. I logged into my real company account, the one linked to the trust's shares, and downloaded the last 6 months of board packets. The inconsistencies I'd seen on the inside were mirrored there. Inflated metrics, misclassified revenue, even notes about timing adjustments to meet investor expectations. The language was so casual it almost felt innocent. It wasn't. At noon, Maya messaged me. "They froze your badge." I smiled at the screen. "Good," I typed back. "Means it's working." That night, I sat in my car outside headquarters, watching the cleaning crew turn off lights one by one. I thought about all the times I'd bit my tongue to keep peace, all the data I'd watched get massaged until truth lost its shape. And I thought about my father, the reason the trust existed, the man who'd once told me, "If they won't let you in through the front door, buy the building." I didn't buy it, but I had the keys now. The next morning, the company woke up to a calendar invite sent from my personal domain to every board member and senior exec. Subject line, clarification on ownership and governance concerns. Attached, a 12-page report. Inside, line by line, were the facts they'd tried to bury. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m. sharp. By 8:55, my report had already circulated through every executive inbox like a slow-burning fuse. It wasn't an expose, it was a mirror. 12 pages, no adjectives, no vengeance. Just receipts, altered dashboards, expense anomalies, project allocations that somehow turned marketing budgets into consulting fees. And at the center, a note. All of these occurred under the authorization of the CFO and VP of Product, Ethan S. I didn't sign it as Jonathan. I signed it as J. H. Reynolds, trust beneficiary and employee, both of my names side by side. At 9:01, the conference link opened. 11 faces in neat little boxes, most of them pretending their screens weren't frozen. The chair spoke first, an older woman with a voice that could slice marble. "Jonathan, would you like to explain what this is?" "I already did," I said. "Page 1 explains context. Page 2 lists source paths." Ethan forced a grin, tight and wet at the edges. This feels like entrapment, like a gotcha moment." I leaned forward. "Gotcha requires deception. You were the one editing queries, not me." The CFO interrupted, his voice low but trembling. "The report lacks proper framing. These are operational adjustments, not misconduct." "Then you won't mind if the external auditors confirm that," I said, "because I've already sent them a copy." That's when the silence turned from awkward to dangerous. You could hear breathing over the call. The chair folded her hands. "You sent this outside the company." "Yes, you said perception matters." Ethan's face drained like a screen losing color. The CFO closed his laptop mid-meeting, a gesture that spoke louder than any denial. The chair didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Jonathan, please stay on the line." So everyone else, 15-minute recess. They all dropped off one by one, except her. She adjusted her glasses, then said quietly, "You've put us in a very difficult position." "No, ma'am," I replied. "They did. I just refused to decorate it." For the next 2 hours, the board spun. Legal teams scrambled, PR ghostwrote future apologies, and HR deleted Slack messages that probably didn't disappear as completely as they thought. Ethan tried calling me twice. I let it ring. By 2 p.m., an emergency session was convened. The chair led it personally. Ethan wasn't on the invite. Neither was the CFO. That's when I realized how fast chaos mutates once the truth is introduced. It doesn't explode. It rearranges everything. Inside that meeting, I walked through every piece of evidence as calmly as if I were presenting quarterly results. I didn't raise my voice, didn't dramatize, just facts, timestamps, patterns. One of the independent directors, a man who'd barely looked up during past reviews, finally said, "If even half of this is verified, we have exposure to the SEC." I nodded, which is why I'd suggest immediate disclosure. Transparency buys time. Cover-ups buy headlines. They voted. Unanimous. An independent audit. Suspension of 2 executives pending results. Ethan's name was in the record. So was the CFO's. That should have been victory. It wasn't. It was relief. Sharp. Temporary. Incomplete. Because truth, once out, doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like silence after the gun goes off. That evening I walked to the parking lot as the sunset bled against the glass of the building. My badge no longer worked, but I didn't need it. I wasn't staying. Maya caught me outside the gate, eyes wide. "They're saying you blew up the company." I smiled faintly. "No, I just turned the lights on." She hesitated, then said softly, "They deserved it." Maybe. But I'd learned a long time ago that karma doesn't work for applause. It just works. The weekend blurred. Reporters started calling the company by Monday. The board announced organizational restructuring by Tuesday. By Wednesday, Ethan's desk was empty. By Friday, so was the CFO's. The audit confirmed what everyone already knew, but had been too afraid to say out loud: creative accounting, misreported metrics, side deals with third-party vendors, classic rot, hidden under PowerPoints and slogans. The chair called me personally that evening. Her tone was different now. "You understand that after this, your position here is complicated." "I never wanted a position," I said. "Just honesty." She sighed. "The board is offering you a transition package. Discretionary. Generous." I thanked her, declined it. She was silent for a moment. "Then what do you want, Jonathan?" "Nothing," I said. "I already got it." Mini catharsis. That night, I slept like someone who'd been underwater too long and finally remembered air exists. But peace never arrives without noise. The next Monday, a news blog ran the headline, "Anonymous Insider Exposes Internal Fraud at Growth Tech." Anonymous, my ass. Everyone inside knew exactly who had done it. I started getting LinkedIn messages, some angry, some grateful, a few from employees who said they'd been afraid to speak up. For a week I thought that was the end of it. But then I got the letter, a thick white envelope embossed with the company logo, delivered by courier. Inside, a notice from corporate counsel requesting cooperation in ongoing proceedings. Legalese 4, we're trying to find a reason to pull you into the fire you lit. I read it twice, smiled, and slid it under my coffee mug. They still didn't understand. I hadn't built a bomb. I'd built a record, and records don't burn. 3 months later, the air in San Francisco changed. The company rebranded. New logo, new mission, new faces in the About Us section. Same building, different ghosts. The audit report went public in a heavily redacted version, enough to satisfy investors, not enough to satisfy curiosity. But those who'd been there, those who'd seen the dashboards and the doctored metrics, didn't need a report to know what had really happened. I was already gone. I moved into a small house south of the city, the kind with real wood floors in a yard that needs tending, the kind of place you buy when you're ready to stop running but not ready to stop moving. My days became smaller in the best possible way. Coffee at 7, quiet work by 9, and the sound of my own keyboard instead of 100 Slack notifications. Sometimes I caught myself opening old folders, screenshots, logs, names. I'd look at them the way you look at scars. Proof that the wound closed, not proof that it happened. Then I'd close the laptop and step outside. The world still turned without dashboards. It took a while for the noise to fade. Reporters stopped calling. LinkedIn stopped buzzing. People who'd avoided me in the halls of that glass building started reaching out, cautiously, like maybe my silence meant forgiveness. I didn't answer most of them. I wasn't angry. I just didn't have anything left to explain. And then one evening, as the sun slipped behind the pines and the world smelled like rain and sawdust, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but habit dies slow. "Jonathan?" The voice was quiet, strained. "Ethan." For a second I said nothing. He continued. "They came after me. Legal, audits, all of it. I lost everything. You win." I leaned against the porch rail. The boards creaked under my heel. "I didn't win, Ethan," I said. "You just stopped pretending." He didn't respond, just breathing on the line like static with guilt inside it. "I wanted to call," he finally said, "to ask why you did it." "Because truth doesn't fix itself," I said. It needs someone willing to stay when the room gets quiet. He exhaled, something between a sigh and a sob. Then the line went dead. That was the last time I heard his voice. But the company still existed, under new leadership, new language, new slogans that sounded cleaner. The product, the one I'd built years ago, was still there, dusted off, given a new interface and a second chance. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about memory. Maya texted me once. "They're rebuilding it right this time. Thought you'd want to know." I read that text twice, smiled, and didn't reply. Some stories end better when you leave the last line blank. Weeks passed. The yard grew wild, the kind of green that doesn't care about human schedules. I learned how to cook something more complicated than takeout, learned the sound of rain without a calendar reminder. And sometimes when the quiet got too comfortable, I'd think about my father again. He told me once, "The world doesn't reward truth, son. It just stops punishing you for saying it." He was right, because one afternoon I drove past the old headquarters. The sign was gone. The parking lot empty except for a construction truck and a new logo on the wall. A different name, a different future. I parked for a minute, window down, engine humming softly. No nostalgia, no anger, just a strange, grounded calm. I wasn't the man who'd walked in pretending to be someone else anymore. I was the man who'd walked out without needing to pretend at all. I rolled the window back up, checked the rearview mirror, and caught my own eyes. Steady, unhurried, finally unafraid. Then I pulled onto the road and didn't look back. The world didn't applaud. It never does. But it didn't lie either. And that, after everything, was enough.